Three, two, one, and we're live. So, how are you doing today? Great. That's the best answer ever. If it's not that, we have got a lot of work to do. Clearly, I'm just glad the rain stopped finally.
Yeah.
It was. I mean, I haven't spent a lot of winters in LA, but the rain seemed just strange.
Uncharacteristic for Los Angeles.
I think so. Yeah.
The LA River was actually like at river levels. I saw one from I think it was in Hollywood. It was about 6 inches from the fence.
Yeah.
Which I've never seen. It's pretty much in that little trench.
Right, and now it's like fully
I
pumping.
grew up here and I never knew that was an actual river
Yeah.
until like 10 years ago. About 10 years ago, I found out that was an actual river that we put concrete into. I just figured it was a thing that we built.
Oh, really?
No, that's what we do here. Like when you go back east, like head the east of the United States in a plane, you have to move trees to build things. Well, we put trees in places in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
It's a desert.
That's kind of wild. Yeah. Man controlling nature or trying to. Well, I lived in China for 18 years, and the government was constantly trying to control every aspect of nature, from building massive dams where they shouldn't be to, making it rain and seeding clouds and stuff like that.
Working well for them.
Clearly. So how have you been so far this year? It's March. It's quite exciting. Like, things are happening.
Yeah, it is. I got used to writing 2024 about a month ago. So
That's helpful.
I write the date daily, and I finally realized at one point for 1 month, I take notes for clients, and I had to go back and change 3 to 4 on all the client records. But I've gotten that down, so things are good now.
That's the only hurdle that you had for 2024.
That is not the only hurdle I've had for 2024, definitely.
Okay. I was super interested in speaking to you because I went a little bit into your background and learned, what you do with psychedelics, how you kind of introduce them to people. And obviously, I really want to get into all of that because I find it a super fascinating space. I mean, I've been to lots of places in South America where they practice, these psychedelic practices and things like that. And to, get a chance to chat with you, learn about what you're doing here in Los Angeles, I thought that'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think there's probably a misunderstanding about what I do because people will call me and say, "You're just like advertising what you do. Aren't you going to get arrested?" As a psychedelic integration coach, what I do is work with people before and or after they work with a psychedelic substance. So they might come to me for preparation, they might come to me for integration or both, but the middle part they sort of do on their own or with someone else.
I feel like the middle part is like the really important part because obviously you want to be working with someone you really trust, right? And I'm sure there's some better practitioners and some less reliable practitioners maybe.
There are, but you do have to remember that, there's obviously a lot of media and a lot of hype around psychedelics right now. And, the efficacy of the studies are things like anxiety and PTSD and smoking and, end of life and all kinds of different things. But every one of those studies has a significant therapeutic component before and after. I mean, it's still called MDMA-assisted therapy and psilocybin-assisted therapy. Now, that's in the Western model. When you talk about things like South America, well, it's a different culture there. They're not segregated into little nuclear families everywhere and go off by themselves after an experience. They're in community already and they live that way. So the need for formal integration of a more therapeutic nature like we have here is not as important in cultures where it's an indigenous practice.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that they do. It's something unusual here and it's a little bit more individual even when we work in groups here. And there's a different dynamic working with the group, working individually, working with facilitator. Those are all different things, but integration is more important here because of the way that we live.
Right, because you don't want people having these experiences and then being isolated or alone if they're not able to process what the therapy or what they've come through.
And it's also a matter of, if you're just doing it in order to make some kind of personal gain, like personal or spiritual growth. Well, my personal experience, the reason I got into this is because I was away from psychedelics for a long time when I'd use them as, an instrument for altering my consciousness just so I couldn't feel what was going on. Just about any other substance I could put in my body was along for that ride. But when I came back to psychedelics and I had some pretty profound insights as to why I was having the trouble I was having, I thought now that I've seen all of that, because I could see the patterns in my life and what I had done, what other people had done, and pinpoint the moment of my traumas in some cases. And I thought, well, now that I've seen that, everything's going to be different. And in about 2 or 3 weeks, everything was the same. Rinse, repeat a couple of times, like, why isn't this helping? Why do I see these things, but I'm not changing? I started investigating. I'd been away from psychedelics for over 20 years.
Okay.
I found out about something called psychedelic integration, which
Wow.
I've never heard of. which means you have to take the insights and lessons, and there's always a lesson in the psychedelic experience, even if it's not apparent. Take those lessons and do something to incorporate them into your life, however small. But a lot of people think that coming at it from the angle of knowing, people want to be their own therapist, be their own guru, be their own teacher. That's great, but we can't see our own blind spots.
Definitely not. No, we're our worst enemies on that front.
Yeah. So it takes it takes a different perspective sometimes. It takes a little discomfort because our brains are still acting like it's 15,000 years ago and doing everything they can to conserve a calorie and not make a change. And energy wants to go the way that it's always gone. And brains are very obstinate. Brains are actually not very smart. They do a lot of thinking. They're great computers, but garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
And they don't give us a lot of good information sometimes.
Also true. Yeah, that's a problem.
And our brains have three primary responsibilities: learn, remember, and automate things. And in automating things, it will ingrain some things into us, and we'll do it again and again and again because it worked at one time. Now it's just not giving us the outcome.
It's cementing habitual behavior, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's in our nervous system. And our unconscious mind acts 1/2 second ahead of our conscious mind. So this is why things happen, something happens, I have a reaction I don't like, and the next thing I know, I'm doing something I don't want to do or saying something I don't want to say. It's like, what the hell was that? Because it just happened before I could see it coming.
That's wild. It's wild. I really want to know how you kind of got into this space, and maybe talk about some of your early years where you were using these kinds of products or these kinds of drugs as kind of more recreational. But where are you from originally?
Well, that's a tough question right off the bat. Let's just say that I'm from all over Southern California. I mean, I had moved, so far I've determined that I'd moved 17 times by the time I was 12.
17 times by the age of 12.
By the age of 12. This is one of the things that eventually came up in me as, there's a problem.
Yeah, that didn't have any lasting damage to your personality or psyche or confidence or whatever.
I remember being like 9 and reading this book in school, and it was about a kid who lived in the same house all his life, and his dad lost his job and they had to move. And the entire book was about how traumatic it was to say goodbye to the tire swing and his best friend and the house and his room and take the stuff off the walls. And I remember thinking, what a wimp. She's done this like 10 times. And then years later, I look back and holy shit, that is traumatic.
Yeah. That's why I didn't build any lasting relationships.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
But that's where I'm from, all over Southern California, mostly around the South. Torrance, Lomita, Redondo Beach, that area for the most part.
That's beautiful, beautiful part of the country. Yeah.
Really is. But, I started using psychedelics along with any other drugs about 13, 14, and used psychedelics along with many other drugs until my late 20s. And at that time, I got mixed up in hard drugs.
Okay.
And my life really spiraled out of control. I mean, I was an addict. Oh, and I lived in a very unsavory place. And I know when I moved there, I had a car. When I moved out, I didn't. And to this day, I can't tell you what happened to that car. I don't know if I sold it, gave it away, lost it, it got towed away. I can't tell you. I have no idea. That's where I was.
You were just so out of it. Yeah. And how many months or years, were you addicted in that way?
I think it was really bad for about 3 months.
Okay.
And I was just about at rock bottom. I don't know. It was at the point where it's like I lost my job and I don't know how I'm going to pay my rent. And I really had no plan. And luckily someone pulled me out of that physical environment. And I moved away from the South Bay eventually. I cut ties with everybody I knew. And I just kind of white-knuckled it out of addiction. I stopped using all substances except for cannabis, which I abused for about 20 years.
Okay.
And then 10 years ago, my wife at the time passed away. Married for 23 years, and then she passed away one night unexpectedly.
I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, that's hard.
Well, threw me into grief, and then I suddenly realized I have a lot of childhood trauma that's not been acknowledged, much less addressed in any way.
So that was a trigger.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, everything, I sometimes compare it to, emotions are like everything else in this world. They're born, they have a certain function, and then I won't say they die, they transform. Energy can't be created or destroyed. Emotions, we can stop halfway and say, I don't want to feel this. And when that happens, it gets stuck inside of us. And after a while, it's kind of like when you have a closet and you keep putting things in there, and pretty soon you have to hold the door closed because if you let go of it, stuff's going to come flying out.
Yeah, and then the door just explodes.
That's what it feels like inside of people when they come for coaching finally.
Oh.
And that's how I felt. So
you've been there.
Oh, yeah. I sought out the help of a coach, a therapist, and I was trying to quit smoking. I smoked cigarettes at the time. And my coach said, I heard there's some study that said psilocybin helps that. I thought, well, mushrooms, I've taken them lots of times. I found some mushrooms and took them. And I didn't quit smoking that night. but I did see a lot of things from my life and finally had an understanding about how I got where I was.
Amazing. Amazing. So if we go back a little bit, like growing up in Southern California, you moved around quite a bit. Was that just because of your parents' work? Like, some families are in the military and they end up moving every year or something like that. I'm just curious.
It was because of my parents, not because of my parents' work.
Fair enough.
There are a lot of holes in the story, but it was just a very bad situation. We're talking about like getting pulled out of school in the middle of the school year and transferred somewhere else.
Oh, wow. That's intense. Yeah, that's wild. And then, were your parents also using drugs and alcohol as well? Or was it just like a friend's ecosystem that you were kind of caught up in at that early stage?
I mean, when you live that kind of life, you don't live in the best places. We weren't moving to Beverly Hills.
Fair enough. No, I understand. Yeah.
We were moving into little kind of crappy apartment buildings here and there and houses we could barely afford. And, there aren't the best neighbors around there. I didn't have any longstanding ties with anybody. And around 12 or 13, I started drifting towards people who were into drugs and alcohol.
Yeah. And were your early experiences with that, drastically negative, or, you used for quite a while, I guess, like a lot of young people experiment, right? But was that something that, kind of helped you through that time in your life? Like you wanted to kind of avoid dealing with what you were dealing with in your teenage years?
Yeah, it helped me numb myself. Exactly what it helped. I'd have been a lot better off in a therapist's office, but that's how I ended up coping at the time.
Yeah, going to the therapist first is never really an option, right? You gotta do all kinds of stupid shit first and then figure it out.
Well, that wasn't a thing culturally for me until 10 years ago. I had never done any serious work on myself. It just wasn't a concept I was familiar with. I tried to be a good person. I tried to improve, but the concept of personal and spiritual growth wasn't a thing that was ever real for me in the culture that I moved out into the San Fernando Valley and bought a house and went to work and got a career, eventually started a business, but I was never on the alternative side of things. I was when I was younger, but then I just sort of stayed away from everything that might be a temptation from me. Tried to live like a straight life for a long time.
But if you hadn't done the work that you needed to do to kind of deal with the trauma that you were dealing with when you were a teenager, then you're just kind of masking it, right? And then it's just going to come back and haunt you at some stage.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And at that time, 10 years ago, I would have no business counseling anybody about anything. I was a very angry and confused person at that time.
I know what that feels like. Yeah. It's been a tough 4 years with COVID and stuff like that. It's been insane, but no, definitely some misdirected anger in a lot of different directions.
Yeah.
So, okay, so you get through your teenage years, you continue to abuse drugs and alcohol, you hit rock bottom, someone pulls you out, and then you're able to kind of get yourself clean and sober on your own. Yeah. Well, that's amazing, because not a lot of people can make that transition once they've gone so far down that road.
Yeah, it wasn't much of a choice. I could tell I was headed to a very bad place, so I had to do something.
And do you mind if I ask if it was like a friend or a family member that kind of helped you make that realization?
Well, my parents pulled me out of the physical environment I was in.
Oh, okay.
And then I met someone who I ended up marrying. That was my wife. I was with her for 26 years. But that helped me to sort of live a straight life and adult for a while. And I had a son.
Okay.
I became a father when I was barely 17.
Oh, wow.
That's planned.
Yeah.
In case you're wondering.
Right. No, that's young. Even in your 20s, you're still trying to figure out who you are. At 17, that's got to be also terrifying. Yeah.
It was, but it was a reason to try to do things right.
Yeah, for sure. That's
motivation.
Motivation to, try to live a somewhat normal life.
Straighten up.
Yeah. And so what was it like for you, living a straight life? Like, were you fulfilled by having a job and going to work every day after, coming out of the challenges that you came out of in your teenage years?
There was always something missing, and I never knew what it was.
Just this, like, an ache or just an emptiness?
It's just like, you don't know what you don't know. And it was, the pain that was inside of it.
And you were trying to just fill that with drugs and alcohol, or numb it with drugs and alcohol, but it was always there.
I was younger.
Yeah.
But after I got off the drugs and alcohol, I used cannabis for about 20 years, almost daily.
Mm-hmm.
I was still using drugs. I just wasn't using hard drugs but I was just doing whatever I could not to feel my feelings. That's largely what addiction's about. You just don't want to feel what's inside of you.
Right, but now cannabis is totally legal and people consume it every day. They even like drive with it and go to work with it. I mean, it's been somewhat commodified and accepted in a lot of ways, especially here.
I saw, I can't remember the name of it now. There is a documentary about Snoop Dogg, about his trip to Jamaica.
Oh, really? This must have been good.
Yeah, it was awesome, actually.
Yeah.
You know, he made an album that's not rap oriented. It's much more like reggae, and he said it's about love, togetherness, you know, unity. But we talk about regularly smoking marijuana.
They're amazing, aren't they? Yeah. One of my favorite guys is that I follow on social media, and also he's an actor, and I love his work, a writer as well. Seth Rogen.
Oh yeah.
And he's a very vocal about smoking marijuana, and he has a don't know why I'm promoting him, but I find him so fascinating.
I'm sure he'll appreciate it.
Yeah, he needs the PR.
Checks it.
But you know what he does is on Instagram, he has a company that he makes ashtrays for marijuana smokers, and like once a week, or you know, he makes an ashtray. He sculpts it, like, you know, like in Ghost with Demi Moore and Patrick Swayze. Yeah. He's got his thumbs in it, and he's putting water on it, and he's sculpting it, and he's got the little wheel, and it's moving, and he films himself smoking a joint, making an ashtray. And he does this like once a week, and I'm like, where does this guy have the time? I mean, he's making movies, he's writing movies, and then at the end he like dries it, and then he ashes out his marijuana cigarette in his new ashtray, and he has like a whole line of weed ashtray, and he makes them all by hand. I love that. I absolutely just love that.
Like, you know, cannabis is something I do occasionally now, but I can't do it socially.
Oh no, it's not. No, I agree. Socially is tough. Yeah.
It's also when you use psychedelics, there's something to cannabis. It kind of picks up the neural pathway that thing showed you. Cannabis is pretty psychedelic for me now, so it's not something I could do casually out at, you know, like Hollywood Bowl.
Right.
Like a glass of wine and a joint, I'd just be
not even to like wind down at night.
I mean, maybe to wind down at night, but I can't be. You know, you're probably not talking to me much. You know, I'm in my own world.
It's a good way to describe it, because I've come to California via China, which is where I lived for 18 years in Shanghai. And then also I was living in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates for about 4 years during COVID. And these are two countries where drug use is severely punished.
Yeah.
The criminal codes there for drug use and drug distribution are really crazy. So then,
like, lose a hand.
Yeah, or jail for life crazy. Yeah, on even if you just have enough for like personal consumption.
Like Midnight Express crazy.
Like Midnight Express crazy. Maybe too old a reference for a lot of you out there.
Sorry about that, kids.
Look it up. But yeah, and then I came here to California because I've been living abroad for 25 years almost, and then I came back here to California, and now, you know, there's marijuana shops. Yeah, and the thing is, the edibles are fantastic. Like, you just, you know, you're end of a long day, you've had a long stressful day, and you want to have a glass of wine or a whiskey, and you know, like, sit out on your patio and, you know, watch the sun go down, and you pop a you know, one of these gummy edibles with THC in it, and just kind of calms you right out. It can be nice.
You know, I can't tell you the year it was, but, you know, I abused cannabis. And when I say abused, I mean I just smoked it to not feel anything. I wasn't enjoying it. It was like most addictions, you know. You're just trying to stay here. You're not trying to get from here to here. You're just trying to stay here.
Right.
And not know what's going on.
This is like cement that level of what, like just avoidance.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I quit for like 4 or 5 years, and then my sister gave me some, and that was about the time that it had all changed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, now we've engineered cannabis and made it super strong. And, you know, the first time I smoked some, I think it was, well, no, that was really, but that's when I watched the movie Gravity when it was on.
Oh, that's
one of those things where it's like, wait, what did he just say? I'm going to rewind it.
Yeah.
Wait, I missed it again. I'm going to rewind it. Now, this time I'm going to pay attention. I don't know where I was in my head. And then, like, oh, shit, I missed it again. Finally gave up and watched it later. But it was unbelievable how weed had changed from what it was into what it is.
Yeah, because I have a lot of marijuana smoking friends. I never really did a lot of the smoking, but I'm quite interested in the edibles. I can get into that a little bit later. But a lot of my friends that used to smoke marijuana, they never really knew what they were getting every time they rolled a joint.
Yeah.
And now you can walk into one of these shops, and it's like they've just made it so scientifically reliable that basically no matter what you get, you're going to get the same kind of high that you got last time. And there's kind of no guessing, no dud batches, no randomness to it. They've really kind of made it a business you can rely on, which is really, I think, quite wonderful.
It is, but I have to say that I know more than a couple of people who used to be in the business of growing and selling to dispensaries, and when there was medical cards, and when it was just legalized flat out, that's when the big businesses came in and everything consolidated, and they made these regulations where you had to have certain kind of insurance and inspections and everything, and it just pushed people out of that business.
Oh, really? So the owners,
the companies, the whole nature, and this is one of the debates within the psychedelic community. You have 3 different routes to make them available. That's medicalization, decriminalization, legalization. Well, there are drawbacks, but legalization is, that the big guys with the cash will come in and buy everybody else out, and it's kind of a race to the bottom. Okay. There is a recent study that said something like 70% of the cannabis tested from dispensaries had less than the amounts advertised of THC and CBD, CBN.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I haven't read this. You gotta introduce me.
I'll see if I can find it again. I just saw it and thought, surprised.
Yeah, that's wild. And I mean, what was it like? What was it like for you for the 5 or 6 years that you stopped smoking marijuana? Like, how were you able to fill that hole if you weren't, high and trying to avoid your past trauma?
Wow, that is almost like,
or were you just living with it and just owning it, and just miserable every day? I'm curious, I
wasn't miserable, but I was convinced that something was wrong and it was all outside of me. Things were happening that I didn't like. Things were happening to me. That's the difference between kind of taking responsibility for what's going on inside yourself and
thinking it's all external, which it's not always.
There's a pretty basic formula, and this is in some of the patterns and the things I do coaching with, and that is there's some discomfort in your body. And, let's take cigarette smoking. When you start smoking cigarettes, it tastes like shit. It's smoke. Human beings should be averse to smoke. There's something inside of us that says, hey, there's smoke over there. Get the hell out before you die. And yet we burn this thing and put it in our lungs, and so we cough and we hack and we puke and whatever. After a while, our brain says, okay, if you're going to do this, I'm going to stop torturing you. And it's not going to taste like that. I mean, the taste of cigarettes doesn't smoke. We don't grow an extra skin on our throats. It just isn't as objectionable anymore. It's because we're kind of unconscious to it. One of the ways that people quit smoking, and this is proved out by the work of Judson Brewer in Yale, he runs the smoking cessation clinic there, and he simply does mindfulness at first for it. What he does is just tell people, I'm not going to tell you to quit smoking, but I want you to be completely and totally conscious when you're smoking. Don't think about something else. Inevitably, a couple of people from the cohort come back to him and go, I'm out. It tastes like shit. I don't want anything to do with it.
So people were smoking while being kind of distracted by something else and not accepting the full taste of what was going on. Like the brain just kind of switched off.
99.999% of smokers do this. That's the only way that you can take smoke into your lungs and have it, I smoked for 25 years. I loved it, but I was unconscious to the taste of it.
What were you reading? Were you reading newspapers or in the morning, or were you watching TV smoking?
Everybody does. You just light a cigarette and it's just something you're doing. You're off. Well, we can go anywhere in our minds. We spend a lot of time in the future and the past.
Right.
We don't spend very much time here, and we don't spend a lot of time paying attention to what we're doing.
Yeah. Now you see a lot of people on the street just smoking, checking their phones, right?
Well, you talked about South America. They have Nicotina rustica there. It's got 20 times the nicotine that we have in ours. It's a different kind of tobacco. And I heard a curandero from there talking once, and he said, the difference between us taking in tobacco and you taking it is there are a lot of differences. For one, it's a sacred medicine to us. When they're cutting down ayahuasca vines, they're blowing smoke on it to heal it. They view tobacco as a master plant, the most powerful plant in the jungle, according to most people in South America.
That's amazing.
And they say when we smoke it, it's a plant of intention. We think about what it is we want and what we want to happen. Very important decision to make, smoking. When you smoke, you have tobacco that's full of all kinds of adulterants, but you're also thinking, I hate my job, my boss is an asshole, this is probably going to kill me. What do you think it is you're taking into your lungs if you're doing?
Just all negativity.
But I have personal experience with this. I smoked for 25 years, and I would smoke once in a while. I'm one of these people that can smoke once in a while, and I don't start smoking again.
Okay, well that's...
Went to Europe for 2 weeks. When I was in Rome for 5 days, I decided I wanted to smoke. I smoked for 5 days, then I quit. But the problem is when you smoke once in a while, you're like, I'm going to smoke the cigarette, I'm going to enjoy it. And gradually it began to taste different. And the last cigarette I had was in September of last year in just outside of Atlanta, Georgia. I'm in traffic, and I thought I'm going to pull over and get out of traffic for a while. I'm going to have a cigarette. I go and buy a pack, take one, put the pack out for some lucky person to find,
Mm-hmm.
light it. And, I'm really paying attention because I want to enjoy this. I took a hit, tasted like shit.
Really?
Tried it
That's
again.
wild.
I cannot smoke cigarettes now. They taste terrible. They smell great, but they taste awful. So I just can't smoke them because I was paying attention at the time. And that's part of brewer's work.
Interesting. So if you're fully conscious and aware of what you're doing and actually like trying to identify what you're tasting and what you're feeling, most people will be turned off by the experience.
If you're fully conscious and paying attention to what you're doing, a lot of things change.
Yeah, I bet.
You might notice that your eating habits change.
Mm-hmm.
You'll notice when you're getting full. You might notice that your body's uncomfortable when you're upset. There are a lot of things that come from mindfulness. And I will say that I'm using, I don't know if you're familiar with Ellen Langer. She's a psychology professor at Harvard. She was the first tenured female professor at Harvard. She's been researching mindfulness since 1975.
Oh, wow.
She's like the godmother of mindfulness. She says that mindfulness is a process of noticing things. She says that if you want to be mindful, just take a few minutes every day and notice what is new and different. And that could be whatever's on these headphones you haven't seen before would be new to you. Sure. Coffee mugs I've used for years and not looked at all the artwork in detail. That's new and different. I can tell you the difference between the two ceiling fans in my office now, and I couldn't before. If you just notice what's new and different every day, you're being mindful. It's kind of a hack. You don't have to worry about body scans or breathing a certain way or my feet on the floor. Just noticing.
Or handfuls of pharmaceuticals.
Handfuls of pharmaceuticals, whatever is that's in your purview that you want to check out. Yeah.
Yeah. And she's been doing that since the early 70s. That's incredible because...
ton of research. She's got some great books, one called Counterclockwise. She has a book called Mindfulness, and the latest one is The Mindful Body.
That's wild because I feel like, I grew up, I'm a little bit maybe younger than you, but I grew up, in an era where we didn't have mobile phones.
Mm-hmm.
And I maybe at that time, maybe being mindful was easier. And I feel like maybe her studies in the last 20 years since we've had this explosion of mobile phones has probably changed a ton because I feel like no one's living in the present, no one's mindful, no one's paying attention to things around them. Everyone's just stuck on their screens or on their devices.
Saw this, there was a picture, I don't know, it was like Madonna or something, and there was a guy at a concert down just a few rows back standing up, and this was an older picture, so it was a cell phone with a little tiny screen.
Mm-hmm.
He's looking at the phone filming it, and someone wrote, these were $900 tickets. This guy watched the entire concert on a 2-inch screen.
Yeah.
So they
terrible.
Watch it later on a 2-inch screen.
Yeah. And not in 4K, not on,
Not in person while he's there.
No. No, it's crazy how many people go to concerts or sporting events and just watch the whole thing through their phone. It makes no sense to me at all. Like, just put the thing down and enjoy where you are.
You're actually here.
Yeah. Well, I started making adventure television shows and stuff like that because I got really fed up with like living in the city and having to like spend time in other people's lives and connecting with other people and working with other people. Like I just wanted to go out and, be out in nature, right? So I would go out and do these 2-week hikes and treks and climbs all around China when I was living there and now all around the world. And just sleeping in a tent 12 days, no phone, no interaction with people outside of the little group that you're with. And I just found it like so peaceful and so refreshing to kind of be away from the phone, be away from modern society and just kind of, go back like 15,000 years to when we were just walking from camp to camp or from cave to cave, hunting, gathering, doing whatever we had to do. And I think there's part of that bit in your brain where it's like, oh, thanks for taking me home. Or thanks for taking me back to that time when life was so much more simple.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. So when did you decide to give up on the, normal everyday adulting life and start to want to train yourself to educate people through a similar kind of trauma to what you'd had? And how did you kind of get into this space?
Well, when I had the experiences with psilocybin, and I couldn't figure out why they weren't sticking, I found something called psychedelic integration, Googled. And I found out there was a psychedelic integration circle in Santa Monica. What is that?
What is that?
People go. It's a safe space to talk about psychedelics, talk about your experiences, get support from people, build community.
Mm-hmm.
So I headed down to Kathmandu Boutique in Santa Monica.
Oh, that's a thing. Is it still there?
Well, yeah, it's still there. On Lincoln Boulevard off the 10th. Super cool store. Rena and Bina, two sisters, own it.
Okay.
Just a super cool store. Don't spend too much time there unless you got a lot of money. You'll find something everywhere. They have crystals and statues and posters and paintings and everything's just an awesome place. But there's a little room in the back where we have the meetings, integration circles. I went to those and I discovered there was like a community. And I discovered there was this thing called integration, that you have to do something. But if you ask 10 people what psychedelic integration means, you'll get 11 or 12 answers.
So it's just kind of completely random.
Kind of the wild, wild west as to what people do. Some people integrate with another psychedelic, or there's a lot of answers to it. To me, it just means, you have to sort of make the changes that you've seen are necessary in your life, and you have to have a process for that. So I started figuring out how to do it on my own. I've read a lot about psychology. I've read so much personal and spiritual development philosophies and disciplines and exercises. And eventually they asked me to start facilitating those integration circles because I was a regular there. People knew me. And when I was doing that, people would come to me because I'm a facilitator and ask for advice or counseling of some kind. And then I found out there was a certification program for psychedelic integration coaching. Well, I'll take that. And I did. And then I had my own small business. I had an IT staffing business. And coaching business kept coming away. And I was kind of like, yeah, thanks, but I'm trying to work on my business. And it just kept increasing. And pretty soon I got the message like, well, I could do this.
Time to switch gears, maybe. And
something that's...
Yeah. And when was that? I mean, was this in a period of time after your wife had passed away?
Yeah.
So,
It was, whole process started about, my path started about 9 years ago. This whole process started, I've been a full-time coach for 3.5, almost 4 years now.
okay. So
That all started like 7 years ago. I found the circles and everything.
and that was a reaction to you dealing with your loss also. So that had all this kind of childhood trauma and stuff had bubbled up to the surface, and you went and found those circles and those communities to try to work through it.
It was community just to kind of find the others, as Timothy Leary would say. But what I did was learn about integration and how I needed to use my experiences and what I needed to do to actually make changes in my life. And change is usually a little bit uncomfortable because your body and your brain want to do what they've always done. So just thinking you're in a good place isn't always sufficient. Sometimes you have to do things and go against the current to actually change your habits.
That's interesting because, like if I had suffered loss in my life, I don't know if I had gone through maybe a bit of depression or something had arisen past trauma. I don't know if I would realize like, oh, I should, go to a psychedelic circle or integration circle or like I wouldn't even know, where to find that. Or, how did you even make that decision, like not to go to a hospital or go to rehab? Or
started off that I was in coaching and therapy, and my coach told me, if you're trying to quit smoking, I heard the psilocybin helps that, and that's not what happened when I took psilocybin. The thing with psychedelics is when I took them originally, I was looking outside, and there's a big intention is a big part of the psychedelic experience. Whatever your intention is, going to kind of move that way. And if you're looking out here, that's where the substance goes. That's why a lot of people say, I used mushrooms and was partying when I was kids, but it wasn't anything introspective. Well, as soon as you start looking inside, that's where the substance goes. So as soon as I took the substance, it looked inside me and said, you've got a lot of shit inside of you, and you need to see these things. You need to deal with them. And it was a relief to see them, but I thought just seeing them would help me change. It wouldn't. I had to go get therapy. I had to get coaching. I was working through things, and I just thought, this isn't enough. So I need to do something myself. When I figured out how to do integration for myself, I figured out how to do it with other people. It seemed to be helpful, and I never knew it was something I do, but it's something I enjoy very much. And now, probably about half of the coaching I do now is with people who aren't working with or even haven't worked with psychedelics, but I still just do a lot of the integration coaching.
And what is your process or philosophy around the integration coaching? Like, for example, if I came to you, maybe I'd lost my job or something and I had, felt some depression. Maybe I was using drugs and alcohol to mask that. And I came to you, I said, I really want to break the wheel of this cycle I'm in. I can't get out of it. Can you guide me? Can you help me? Can you coach me? Like, how would you start that process with someone like me if I came to you with those kind of symptoms?
There's a lot of variables in there. That's like asking how would you do therapy with someone, you know?
Yeah. I'm just curious. Like, I don't even know how, therapists do therapy. I guess so. So I'm curious.
It's going to take a while.
This is going to be 7 hours.
Yeah. There's almost always an element of mindfulness in my work, especially in integration. When people ask what the goal of psychedelic integration is, well, I mean, to me, the goal in life is to be here as much as possible. Brains are great, and we can spend a lot of time in the future and the past, but we're missing life. It's like the people who were filming the concert on their phone. They're missing the concert. So it's great to be able to go into the future or think about the past, but we're missing what's in front of us.
So mindfulness in the moment, like living now.
Living now.
Yeah.
Being aware of what's happening now. Not letting your brain, brains are actually not very smart. Your brains spit out thoughts the same the way your endocrine gland spit out hormones. It's an organ, it's what it does. And, people are not their brains. It's a 3-pound mass of flesh that works like a computer. But you're not your brain. I think it was Michael Singer in The Untethered Soul who said that if you had a person around you who acted the way your brain does, if it was wrong as much as it's wrong, if it was as critical, if you changed his mind as capriciously as your brain did, you'd probably tell that person to get away from you.
Yeah.
Don't ever come near me again.
Mm-hmm.
But our brains we take very seriously. We take all these strange thoughts and instructions and memories very seriously. And, one of the things meditation teaches us is that thoughts can come and thoughts can go, but we don't always have to think about them.
Yeah, I think one important thing to understand about your brain is that you're not those thoughts, right? You can have a thought and not act on it.
Yep.
So you have some control over, the difference between thinking something and acting something. And that's a huge kind of distinction to be able to make. Like if you're having negative thoughts, that doesn't necessarily mean you're a negative person. You just have to, avoid those or think of something else or try to block them in some way.
Yeah, I wouldn't try to block them.
Oh, right, yeah, because then you're back into the addiction, right?
There's 2 ways I would go about it.
Yeah.
One is, if I have a thought that I'm a loser, you should change that to I'm having a thought that I'm a loser.
And not that you are.
Right. I'm
Yeah.
having a thought that is a great prefix.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is that thought helpful? To really think about it, is that thought helpful? Because your brain has never been told. You're busy playing with the thought. And if I throw a ball to a dog and I see him rolling around on the ground chewing it, somebody might walk up and say, "What are you doing?" Say, "I'm playing with this dog." And they say, "That dog hates that ball." I say, "He's playing with it." They say, "No, he's trying to kill it. He's scared to death of it." I don't know. He's engaging with it. Our brain throws us these thoughts and we spend time with them. It's like, well, he must like that. I'm going to give him some more.
And we
You can actually tell your brain that thought is not helpful. I don't like what it does because it's probably never been told that.
Yeah, no, it's true. Have you ever worked like with athletes in this kind of space? Because I feel like the mental aspect of sports is quite intense, and I feel like especially if you're in competitive sports at a high level, you constantly have doubt about yourself. You constantly have I'm a loser. I'm not good enough. Why did I take that shot? I'm terrible. Like I'm not helping my team. I'm hurting my team. Like these are things that kind of come through your brain all the time over the years, and you have to kind of again say, well, that's not a great thought to have. That's not helpful. Like I feel like sometimes in the sporting realm, this kind of stuff maybe pops out a lot. And I was an athlete for many years, so I still remember, those games or those feelings and those emotions. They still pop up from time to time.
I do a lot of work with NLP and humanistic NLP, and those are all about working with your brain. It's really the study of the structure of subjective experience. What happens between the time this happens out here and something comes out of me and a behavior comes out of me. So yeah, I have a lot of high-performing athletes and performers and executives that I work with because those people have to be performing at top level and they can't listen to their thoughts. I remember this documentary I saw in a CrossFit competition once. There was this ridiculous part they got to where the people were doing like 15 burpees and then, like 15 clean and jerks of a tremendous amount of weight. And this guy said, by the time you get to the second round, if you grab that weight and you think, I might hurt myself, you're probably going to hurt yourself. You can't think that. It just can't be a part of what you're thinking. You can't for a second doubt what's going to happen at that level.
Because then your mind succumbs to that and then your body succumbs to that and then you get injured.
Look, there are studies where they take people who, they take 3 groups of basketball players, 3 groups of 10. They tell the first group, you spend an hour a day practicing free throws for 2 weeks. The second group, you spend an hour a day practicing free throws in your mind for 2 weeks. And the third group, you stay off the basketball court for 2 weeks. well, I'll make up the numbers, but it was something like the guys who practice free throws, improved by 17%. The people who practice free throws in their mind improved by 12%. I mean, they actually significantly improved their skills just by thinking about it.
That's amazing.
Your brain doesn't know the difference. This is what's bad about worrying. Your brain doesn't know the difference between what you're picturing, just because you're picturing it, and what's actually happening outside.
Well, that's kind of terrifying.
Your optic nerve is way back here. So if you want to get claustrophobic, just think that's where I'm seeing back here.
Yeah.
All this thing here does, it's not an aperture through which I view what's out here. It just captures light. And somewhere in my brain, all these pictures are constructed. Well, I also have a mind and a brain, and I can think about things and I can remember things. And one of the destructive things about worrying is my brain doesn't know that that's not happening.
That's amazing.
So it's possible to put things in your brain and help program it. And, oh shit, I might get hurt, creates a picture of me getting hurt. So,
and then, of course, you're going to follow that all the way home.
It's more dangerous than just not having that in your mind at the time. So yeah, athletes had to have control over, I don't even want to say what this is.
No, I don't.
There are unconscious processes that athletes have that they really don't want to deconstruct and start thinking about.
No, and I mean, even when like I've climbed a lot of mountains around the world, and I've walked across deserts and stuff like that for some of the TV shows I've made, and the amount of like being your own cheerleader and getting up in the morning and maintaining that safety around you and that positivity around you does help you achieve the goals that you have, whether it's to climb the mountain or get across the desert safely. Like these like little prompts that you have to give yourself. Feeding the mind with the positivity or feeding your mind with some kind of positive outcome can actually help you get there. And that's been a pretty interesting learning experience for me.
I heard, I think it was on NPR once, there was a woman who led a summit to Everest. And she said that she picked an elite climbing team. And one guy was the best technical climber she'd ever worked with. But he stopped 15 steps short of the summit. Said that he just couldn't do it. And she said the reason was that he thought to himself, I have this 15 steps left. She said, at that literal elevation and at that level of athleticism, the only thing you can do is to look down and use every bit of your strength and summon every bit of courage and energy and say, I'm going to take one step. And then look down and summon every bit of your strength and courage and energy and say, I'm going to take one step.
Yeah.
If you say 15 steps, you might be done. That's what happened to him.
Wow. So he was just thinking above and beyond what his mind was capable of getting him. That's crazy. I've never heard of anyone stopping that close to the summit.
Oh yeah, that's heartbreaking.
Yeah. I've obviously heard the stories and seen the statistics that like at a mountain like Mount Everest, most people who die, most of the fatalities on the mountain are actually for people descending because they've relaxed or they've kind of loosened up or they're rushing to get back because they spend too much time getting up. And these factors of like, so whenever I climb the mountains with my guides and stuff like that, we always get to the top and we say, okay, we're halfway done. Now we got to get down. Right?
Yeah.
And kind of building that expectation that actually the way down is more dangerous. Yeah. Yeah. In many ways. It's interesting. So, you started going to these, you started, I guess, attending these community meetings, and then people started coming to you and trusting you.
I started being the facilitator at the meeting. So the person leading the meeting, basically.
Yeah. And then people started gravitating to you for help and for communication and for guidance, I guess. And was that a role that you really felt comfortable with? Because, I'm terrified if someone puts their worries, their troubles, their hopes, their fears, in my hands and asks for help. Like that, to me, that maybe I wouldn't be a good therapist or anything like that, but to me, that's terrifying. Like, because maybe I can't help them, or maybe I don't know how to. Maybe I don't understand what they're going through, or I can't help them along that journey. Like that's a huge responsibility to take people's hopes and fears and anxieties and try to help them in some way.
Yeah, but it seemed to be something, there was, I was a business owner. I'd been a manager for years, and I was used to, taking care of people and guiding them and training them in different ways. And I've always been interested in the workings of the human mind. That's something that I wanted to figure out so that I could figure myself out. And pretty good with that.
Yeah.
Figuring out what happens between there and here.
Did it help you build a lot of credibility in that community when you were working there, in the fact that because you had been through so much yourself and I guess you had shared your experiences with that group and with that community, and then people were able to kind of gravitate towards you, because you had been through something.
Well, I think that people, so there's a thing called that I call proselytizer syndrome. Sometimes when people work with psychedelics and they're convinced that they need to go out and tell everybody they need to do psychedelics, which I'll just say right now, psychedelics are not for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
They're not a magic bullet by any means. But a lot of people have that experience and they need to run out and tell their friends all about it. Like, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. So
that's what podcasts are all about these days. I mean, everyone seems to be talking about how they've beaten depression or some addiction, using psychedelics. And it's, I don't know, it feels kind of irresponsible for someone to jump on a microphone and put it out into the world and be like, oh, I was depressed and I just took some psychedelics and I'm fine. Or that's how I quit smoking or drinking. I just took some psychedelics and I was fine. But it seems like too easy an answer.
Yeah, it is. And, it is possible for someone to make a drastic change in their life after a psychedelic experience, but it is far more common for that person to fall back into their old habits and patterns and ways of being and thinking after a while. There's a period where you feel invincible afterwards. And that's usually the period in which everyone will run out and tell everyone they need to do this. But if you haven't made any sort of change in that time, you're probably talking to people who know you, who know your habits and patterns and ways of being and thinking, and then you just look like you're telling them that they should be vegan or do PX90 or whatever the latest thing is that you're into.
Yeah.
So I think it's far more effective to make changes within yourself. And if you do that, people will want to know how you got where you are. I think that I just built some credibility because I started working things out for myself. And I would say that people tell me a lot that I appear to be calm or settled. And that's something that a lot of people want. So I think people trust that. They can see that you've made changes and put in the work. So then that that gives you a certain amount of trust with other people.
Yeah, I think being calm and having that kind of calm energy puts people at ease, right?
And people know where I came from. I make sure and let them know this is not how I was a few years ago, and that it took a lot of work to get here. Psychedelics and the work that's required. Yep.
So when you were working with this small community and people started coming to you asking you for coaching or help or training, did you see that as a calling, or were you just like, okay, I'll help one or two people out, like the same way someone at Alcohol Anonymous or something would sponsor someone else and be there for them, on the phone if they call or they want a drink or they help them kind of talk them off the ledge?
It was here and there at first. It didn't seem like something that was viable. And at some point, I was working with a coach, and I kind of thought, like, I can do this.
Mm.
This is something that I think works for me, and I think I could help people. So I made a decision to get some training and try to do that.
And how big a move was it for you to give up, the 9-to-5 job, the business that you had started with the IT staffing job? At what stage did you move away from that and start doing this full time?
I think it was 2.5 years ago that I sold the business.
Oh, well, that's great. And now you've kind of fully dedicated yourself.
Yeah, this is my full-time job. I don't have a backup.
No, there's no backup for sure. I'm really curious though, like how that transition has been for you. Like obviously, you were going through quite a lot of trauma, and you joined this community and started helping other people. I mean, how much of your healing has been through work you've done on your own versus being able to give back and help other people? Like I'm assuming that's part of your journey, is to give back and help other people also.
Yeah, that's what this is all about. Trying to bring other people into this, trying to bring them into a place of calm and comfort.
And I mean, and how does that then make you feel when you've helped someone get there?
Well, I would say what you said probably brought up more for me is that when you start working with people, you have to realize that your stuff is going to come up. I would say that by a large margin, most of the gains that I've made have been from work I've done myself.
Okay.
I had a lot of help along the way, but it's mostly from work I've done for myself. And then when you're working with other people, you have to be ready to face your stuff too.
Well, yeah, because you have to build credibility with that person you're helping, right? And if you don't share and they're sharing, yeah, it's not...
Well, it's just that, someone's going to come and tell you a story, and, I don't know why it is. To this day, it remains true. if you start working with people, people are going to show up and they're going to start telling you their life story, and it's theirs. But I mean, they're going to start telling you about things and you're thinking, well, I know this because that happened to me. I mean, incredibly similar stories from people, and well, that comes up in you. You can feel it.
That's, that's crazy. That obviously, yes, there's patterns in everyone's life that,
There's not a lot of news stories out there. Yeah, but the players change and you can put a little bit of this, but it's pretty modular, but there are a lot of news stories.
And have you seen, like, for example, we all kind of went through a pretty traumatic event 4 years ago when the world closed. You know, people lost their jobs, people's work-life balance changed, people's family life changed, people's relationships with their friends and family changed. And, you know, did you see a bit of an uptick in people kind of being disconnected or using drugs and alcohol to mask some of these feelings? And did you see, I guess, more people needing help is what I was really looking for, I guess.
Yeah, and I don't work much in the area of addiction. I mean, I have people who come to me with addictions, but that's not a focus for me. But I certainly saw an uptick in isolation and anxiety, social anxiety. And then after that, an atrophying of people's social skills when things started getting back to what we call normal now.
Yeah.
I mean, I felt that, you have to kind of learn to interact with people a certain way again.
Yeah, because I remember, just as an aside, I was in Ethiopia, northern Ethiopia, filming in March 2020 when the world closed, and it was quite traumatic for me to kind of get out of Ethiopia. And at the time, I was a resident of Dubai, but Dubai closed their borders even to residents, so I couldn't go back, even though I had a home there and stuff. And so I ended up in Istanbul. And Istanbul was quite strict with the masks, but the city pretty much stayed open. It was a little bit different than what happened here in the United States. But then I remember I was stuck in Istanbul for 4 months. And, the masks and stuff were very serious and people were getting fined for not wearing their masks. But then eventually I was able to get out of Turkey, out of Istanbul and into mainland Europe. So I was in, the first flight I was able to get was Slovenia. So I went to Ljubljana in Slovenia, the capital, and because I was just the first country that opened in Europe to Turkey. And then once I got to Europe, I could travel around freely because they didn't block the borders in Europe at that stage. So I remember landing in Ljubljana in Slovenia and no one was wearing a mask. And I remember walking around the city and no one was wearing a mask. And I remember, I was walking past this street at night and everyone was out on the street drinking. Like, this was July, right? And I felt so much social anxiety and stress just being around so many people for the first time in 4.5 months. It wasn't even that they were wearing masks or not. I just felt so much kind of discomfort by being around so many people all of a sudden, because I basically spent 4 months completely alone. And it was kind of terrifying.
When I was, during at the kind of, not the height of it, but when gyms started opening back up, I started going back to the gym and you had to wear a mask. I started getting really anxious about the people who weren't wearing a mask.
Yeah.
And I eventually just had to put that aside. I realized I'm just making myself nuts here, which is, one of the things I work on with people. If you're going to be angry about something, is there a reason for it? I mean, are you angry because the sun's coming up in the east every day? Well, hang on, because you're in for a ride. How much of the angst that we feel is self-imposed? And that was self-imposed for me.
Yeah, almost all of it.
Some people are going to wear a mask, and you can stomp your feet or talk to the manager, whatever you want to do. It's not going to change the fact that you're going to turn around. It's going to happen again. Mm-hmm. And if you're sorting for difference like that, you're going to find it everywhere. So just, let them do whatever they're going to do, and you do what you're going to do.
I'm curious, how many cases of people do you see coming to you looking for, psychedelic integration? How many people are maybe dealing with past trauma versus how many people are just trying to get out of their own way? I feel like the people, I feel like everyone's always getting in their own way because we're not very mindful. We're not living in the moment. We're constantly self-sabotaging our existence. And I feel like we do this all the time, as a society, but on the individual level as well. And obviously there's people who, are dealing with past trauma and who have gone through significant loss and or had difficult relationships with people in the past that have triggered drug and alcohol abuse and things like that. I'm curious if you see a difference between people who are really working through something painful versus people who are just trying to get out of their own way so that they can live a more productive life or get a promotion or be more creative or follow a path that they didn't think they had the courage to follow.
Yeah, there's a spectrum that clients I work with exist on, and that goes from everything to I'm just trying to get better, to
Better being a blanket.
I just want to get to the next level, whatever that is for me. And I have some things that bother me, but I don't have any significant trauma, to people who have significant trauma in their background. And that's, there's trauma with a small t and trauma with a capital T.
Yeah.
Almost all of that, 99% of coaching issues come down to people doing something they want to do, not doing something they don't want to do, not doing something they want to do, feeling something they don't want to feel, or not feeling something they want to feel. You could put most coaching and most therapy issues in those categories. And a lot of that comes from what we talked about before. So something happens, usually a long time ago, this thing happens, and there's a bad feeling in my body. Now, when that happens, those two things are fused together at the level of the nervous system, so that when that happens again, I have that same feeling.
That's like a PTSD,
That's a simple trigger, actually.
Okay.
It can be the look on my mom's face, let's say. So then my nervous system starts to generalize. It says, that was a bad thing. So this is kind of like that. So you should have that same reaction. This is kind of like that. So you should probably have that same reaction. And next thing you know, I'm in a relationship with someone. They have a certain look on their face. And the next thing I know, I'm pissed off about it, or I feel bad. Something happened. I don't know what it is.
But the blood pressure went up and you just got angry.
What happens is there's something in my body that doesn't feel right. And my brain's trying to figure that out, because this is my unconscious mind, my body. It's a half a second ahead of my conscious mind. So by the time I have the reaction, my conscious mind's like, what the hell just happened? I'm looking around out here to see what the problem is. There's a person here with a look on their face. That's a problem.
I'm very gentle.
Yeah. I feel safe with you in this moment.
We're trying our best.
But this is the same kind of reaction we have for all kinds of things. It may be because something very dangerous harmed me, and it may be because I just had sort of a bad reaction to something. But whatever happens, there's a feeling in my body that happens as a result of something, and I have to deal with that.
Okay.
So whether it's just like simple triggers, I just want to get better at this. I don't want to worry about whether or not I'm going to get hurt when I'm in a performance situation. All these things are happening at the unconscious level. So we have ways of, without using conscious mediation, like trying to talk you out of it, ways of breaking those things apart so that that person can have that look, and then you can just think, all right, that's the look on somebody's face. What's the big deal?
Yeah, and it doesn't trigger and you don't snowball into something bigger that starts pulling you down.
That's what drew me into NLP when I found that, because one of the last frontiers for me was my triggers.
Sorry, NLP? What's
Neuro-linguistic programming.
I needed to ask that. Yeah, neuro-linguistic programming.
Neuro-linguistic programming was developed in the 70s, originally as a way to help therapists be more effective, but it has a trail of techniques and patterns and things to help people with everything from traumas and triggers and phobias, limiting beliefs, fears, and HNLP is humanistic NLP, developed by a guy named John Overdurf, which is like the next level of NLP. And there are a lot of things you can do to help people unhook that nervous system connection so that when something like that happens, it doesn't bother them. Your body's not going to miss you're back there where that thing happened originally.
Interesting. So you kind of like break the wheel, you break the cycle of that connection.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's got to take a lot of work. If you've dealt with that trauma of your mom looking at you in a strange way from like the age of 8, because you broke something in the house and your mom shit on you, which I'm sure we've all been through at some stage, and you're carrying that for 40 years, and now you're 48 years old, and you're looking at your wife who just looked at you the same way or something like that, and you just boil with anger. How hard is it to change like 40 years of that reaction happening like weekly or daily?
It can be surprisingly quick.
Oh, really? No, that's encouraging.
The 40 years is what happens in that instant.
Right. You just have to.
Yeah. Just there are things that you do to correct that, and the 40 years don't matter anymore.
But the 40 years of building that habitual reaction, doesn't it make it stronger? Or
there are, and this is you.
I'm coming at this as a complete novice.
You hit on an interesting point. So we can say that a problem is contained in a neural network, which is just a little gathering of neurons in our brain, a little bunch of neurons. That's a neural network. So here's my problem. Or you can say the problem is a neural network that has what we call a boundary condition around it. So it can't talk to anything else. So you might notice that when you're really in a problem, it's hard to think of what's good. somebody says like, yeah, but you got a lot of friends and, your job and things are great. And you say, yeah, but it's just, things aren't good right now.
That's the last fucking thing you want to hear, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
That's how bad it is because you're stuck in this thing. Now, what you can do is there are ways within NLP, again, of breaking that boundary condition so that you can get out of that isolated neural network and connect it to other things. Once you do that, then, the 40 years have strengthened the boundary. That's the problem. So if they've made that problem very strong, because yes, the more you pay attention to something, the stronger that neural network will be. The less you pay attention to it, the more it will weaken. That's just been scientifically proven. You'll actually grow parts of your brain if you keep looking at a problem over and over and over again. But once you start breaking that boundary condition, you get that brain talking to other parts of the brain, then the 40 years don't matter anymore. That's a cumulative effect, but once it's broken, it's broken.
That's amazing that even that would be possible. So you're a psychedelic integration coach or trainer?
I call myself a transformational coach, and psychedelic integration is one of the things I do.
Okay.
I started off as a psychedelic integration coach.
Okay. And I mean, there's a lot of, just in our description of what you've been telling me today, there's a lot of traditional therapeutic practices that can help people break the connection between past trauma or triggers and things like that. Why would you specifically kind of gravitate towards the psychedelic experience?
Well, psychedelics, if you just want to take one example, since the mid-90s, MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, has been conducting government-sanctioned research into the use of MDMA for the treatment-resistant PTSD with veterans and first responders.
Okay, that's interesting.
So PTSD, when something life-threatening happens, when anything happens, within our brain, there are a couple things that happen. Our brain sorts through and it, categorizes things and it puts things in proper places. And one of the things it does is develop a narrative around something so that I can have a problem that doesn't feel good to me, but I can talk about it without being in the problem. Like I can tell you, I have really shitty depression that happens sometimes. It happens every once in a while. It's no big deal. But when it does, like you were just saying, that's the last thing you want to hear.
Right.
Talk about that, right? But you're fine now. With PTSD, it goes into a part of brain and gets scrambled, and that narrative is never developed. So that if you want to access that problem, you can only do it by being in it. So people with PTSD, when they remember the incident, they're practically there. They're reacting like they're there.
And all the physical ailments and everything comes straight back to them because
it's very, very hard to treat. And treatment-resistant PTSD, even more so. They've had a phenomenal success rate using MDMA. MDMA quiets the fight or flight response, quiets down the amygdala, and it allows people to see that thing happened over here, but I'm over here, so I'm safe right now, maybe for the first time. And that can begin a therapeutic process because sometimes it takes years just to get to the point of having someone being able to talk about the incident without being in it.
So the MDMA frees them up to actually have the conversation. So you actually do a therapy session while on MDMA.
Well, most of the time with MAPS, what they do is they have the MDMA session with people in headphones and eye shades so that you have an internal experience. There's a lot that goes on, like right now. About a third of our brains are being used just in seeing and hearing each other in this conversation. When you cut all of that off during a psychedelic experience, your brain's free to have an internal experience that may give you information that's going to be helpful to you.
So it's not distracted by the outside experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So it makes the inward-looking part of what's going on more focused.
Yeah.
And I mean, is there something about your philosophy to all of this which led you not to wanting to go in traditional therapy routes or not wanting to become a psychiatrist or a psychologist and instead kind of going in this maybe like, I wouldn't want to say it's like an alternative.
It is.
Like an alternative path, basically.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, if you thought about doing the more mainstream path versus where you are today.
Before I found really HNLP or the advanced kind of NLP, I was sort of at a loss of what was next, and that was on the table. Do I need to go back to school and get a degree and get into supervision and get a license? But there's a lot of freedom to being an unlicensed counselor. My wife's a licensed therapist, and there are some restrictions that go along with that. The way that you conduct yourself, the things that you say, the way the separation between the person you're working with and you, different being a coach. You can be a lot more personal, be friends with the people that you work. I work with people who are in my community, in the psychedelic community that I'm a part of in Los Angeles. But I like being a coach.
Yeah.
I like that kind of work. I like change work.
A little bit less rules, right? I mean, even if you're a licensed therapist, you're not supposed to talk too much about yourself or your own life or your own problems sometimes.
There's a lot of things that you have to do as a therapist that you don't have to worry about as a coach.
Yeah. And I mean, so you started off our chat by stating specifically that you help people with preparation to have a psychedelic experience, and then you help people after, but you don't facilitate the psychedelic experience.
Right. That's not what a psychedelic integration coach does.
Right. And I'm just curious, how do you actually prepare someone to benefit the most from a psychedelic experience, and then how do you have to treat them afterwards to make sure that they get the benefits from that? Because that, again, is something I have no idea about.
Yeah. So in preparation, you have to work on things like intention. You set an intention and you let it go. But it's basically, what do you want from this? How do you word that? So there are some rules to it, like intentions should be stated not in positive terms, not negative. Like you don't say like, I want to not be anxious.
I want to stop being a shitty person.
Right. How do you want to be?
Right.
Because it's not impossible, but it's kind of hard for the unconscious mind to process negatives or nots. It may delete them at some kind. So I want to be anxious. Not to mention the fact that when you say you don't want to be something, you have to picture yourself being that way and then kind of run from it. It's not the best strategy for implanting something in your brain. Like we were talking about the studies, your brain just sees what you're doing. You just saw that you're anxious. Now you're running from it. Mm-hmm. There are ways of narrowing down your intention. There are processes we go through and work with people. People should understand what's going to happen. For instance, these substances can largely be feeling and emotion generators. We talked about emotions before. They have a certain life cycle. We stop them halfway and stick them in our body. When that happens, they don't go anywhere. They have to finish that cycle. All they want is to be felt. The problem is that sometimes things happen to us when we're small, and they're very scary. And our body steps in and it says, you know what, that was really bad. Like you almost died, but you didn't. I'm just trying to keep you safe. I'm going to make sure you don't come over here again to this particular place. So now in the psychedelic experience, I might have something like a dark room or a monster or a cliff I might fall off of. Those are all stop points to keep me from going to a certain place that was very bad for me when I was younger. And it might get very uncomfortable for me because I have these emotions stuck in me that are trying to be felt. Well, there's a lot of rhetoric around the psychedelic experience where people say things like there's no such thing as a bad trip. And some people take that very literally and think that means like you're not supposed to feel bad. Well, like I said, they're feeling and emotion generators. So they may push you into a place where you feel the emotions that are stuck inside of you so that they're not stuck inside of you anymore. That can be very uncomfortable. And you can relive like the worst thing that happened to you in your life because you might have checked out and not been present at the time, and it's an unfinished experience, an incomplete experience. Psychedelics actually kind of scan you and see those things. What's stuck inside of you? What's incomplete in you? Let's finish that and get that out of you. So people need to understand that they may have a just fantastic, ecstatic experience, feel great. They may be quite uncomfortable. And if you try to stop that train, you're just going to make it worse.
So you have to let it pass right through.
You have to let it go. You have to feel it. It's trying to be felt. Or do whatever you can, but you can't stop it. And it's not a mistake. That's the main thing. So you're not doing it wrong. This is the impression some people have. This feels uncomfortable. I must be doing something wrong. I need to stop it somehow. Trying to stop it is not the best strategy.
The only way is to kind of go right through and absorb all
this through. Until you felt it, it's not going anywhere. That's an incomplete cycle. It's an unfinished emotion that just wants to die. Stan Grof, who developed transpersonal psychology, holotropic breath work, was one of the early LSD researchers, said the full expression of any emotion is that emotion's death knell. No, nobody has suppressed happiness in them that's dying to get out, because when
we all love it. Yeah.
We take it as fully as we can and say, oh, that didn't last long enough.
We share it on Instagram.
Exactly. Not so for shitty experiences. We want to stop those. That doesn't feel good. I want to stop it. Now it's stuck inside me and it wants to get out.
Mm.
Yeah, it's not a nice feeling when that gets out eventually, but it feels much better once it's done.
And do you ever coach or communicate with clients that and and tell them like, hey, maybe psychedelics won't work for you. Like maybe there's a path forward where you don't need to have that potentially difficult experience.
Well, if someone's taking antidepressants, those have the potential, especially SSRIs or SNRIs, those have the potential to block or to depotentiate or even block the experience totally. They compete for the same receptor. If someone's taking antipsychotic meds, they should not take psychedelics. Those are contraindicated. If someone has a diagnosis or even a family diagnosis of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, most people are discouraged from taking psychedelics. There's some controversy around that now in certain cases, but people who have a history of psychosis or schizophrenia should not be working with psychedelics. And when people come to me and they say, like, this is my last hope, well, this might not be the best option for you.
Yeah, because they're putting too much pressure on the whole experience, and that can't be healthy either.
Exactly.
Because there is no silver bullet. Like I think that's something you've made very evident today. Like it requires a lot of pre-work and post-work in order to get any kind of benefit that you might be looking for.
And if someone says this is my last option, they're probably not thinking about the work they're going to do afterwards. They're thinking they're going to take the substance that's going to fix things.
Yeah.
People come to me and they say, how many times do I have to take mushrooms to cure my depression? You need to talk about that. That's not how it works.
Might be once, might be 10 times. Depends on the work you do afterwards.
It depends on the work you do afterwards, yeah. You can do it. There are plenty of people who use psychedelics regularly who have the same problems over and over again because they're not doing anything about it.
Yeah. It's interesting. As an aside, I have a friend who I did a podcast with, and it's all publicly out there in the world. He had a psychedelic experience, and in that experience, he was put into the head of his son, into the eyes of his son, and there was a period in his life, I guess, where he was a little bit despondent and a little bit depressed, and he wasn't paying enough attention to his children or his son specifically, and he was put into the head of his son, watching himself as a father, walk past his son all the time and not give him the love and affection that the son was wanting in that moment. And of course, the son was small and couldn't explain, hey, I need more love and attention. But the son was feeling it, and that was his psychedelic experience, like being a bad father through his son's eyes. And he said it was devastating.
See, those are the stories that I love. So I'm someone who over cautions about psychedelics because there's so much hype. I feel like there needs to be a little bit of counterbalance.
Especially now, I feel like it's out of control. Like it's really out of control now. Like people are just like, every experience is going to be great.
Yeah, there's going to be a time when the media is going to run out of sunshiny stories, and they're going to start coming after people in the psychedelic community and start pointing out where people have ethics abuses or things that might happen that are bad, or people that have traumatic experiences. All of that's going to be, grist for the mill pretty soon. But right now it's roses and sunshine, and there's not a lot of depth to the coverage, and they don't mention the amount of work that needs to be done. Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, was great, but he had almost nothing about integration in there and did almost none himself. So that, sort of held out the promise of a magic bullet. I got a lot of calls from people after the book came out wanting to know, how many times do I have to take mushrooms to cure my depression?
Yeah.
You have to explain to them that there's a lot more to it than that.
It's not the right question to ask. Yeah. And how much of your role in people's lives that are looking for some kind of healing is kind of telling them like, this might not be for you, or this might not be a magic bullet. Like, I guess setting up the expectations is a huge part of your role.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to temper expectations. We're humans. We're going to have expectations.
Yeah.
People usually say, I know I'm not supposed to have any expectations. I tell them, no, then you wouldn't be human.
Yeah.
You need to temper your expectations.
Yeah, it's like being a sports coach or something where it's like you might not become a professional athlete, but it's going to be an interesting journey.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's, you should always allow for those things anyway, whatever the possibility is. Someone should always know, it's a part of the work you do in coaching sometimes, just letting people know, like, I have a fear of death. Okay, you do realize you're going to die, right? Let's just get that clear. You're going to die. It's one of the first things that you need to tell someone. You're going to die. Now what?
Yeah. And what would be, so if someone had come to you with, let's say, depression, and they said, look, I've been taking pharmaceuticals and dealing with traditional therapists for many years. I feel like it's not helping me. I would like to have a psychedelic experience. And then they would come to you and you would do the pre-work, right? You would identify what it is you want to accomplish or what it is you want to feel, using positives, not negatives. And then that client of yours would go through a psychedelic experience, and then what would be the aftercare or the post, therapeutic or communicative work that you would do to make sure that they benefit from that?
That's going to depend largely on what their experience was. So
I guess the first is like a experience debrief.
It might not even need a debrief. Sometimes, they're just going to come and tell you about something about the experience. And it might be the nature of the experience. It might be their reaction to it. It might be their reaction in the aftermath. There are a lot of variables in there. But it's going to give them, the experience is going to give them a very clear message about what it is that's sitting in the back of their head bothering them. What it is that they think they should do, basically. It's an unconscious message. Right now, you and I are both sitting here, and there's something back here that's bugging us, and we're not conscious of it. But if we were to use one of these substances, it'd get dumped out right in front of us. You'll often hear things like, I didn't know that I was that upset about that. That was important to me. I didn't know that my son felt that. I didn't realize how my son felt when I walked past him those times. These are the kind of things, so that's a perfect example. That's what you'd have to work on with that guy.
Yeah, no, that's interesting.
You'd have to work on his ability to be present as a father and understand that there would be times where he didn't feel like being close to his son. It's just natural as a human. So when someone gets done, well, I'll give you an example for the question you're asking. When someone gets done, they say, you know what? I feel like the most loving person in the world now. I want to tell my wife every day how I feel about her. Don't want to waste another day not doing that. I usually tell them, okay, probably in about a week or two, there's going to come a time where you'll see her. You're going to tell her every day. And then one day you're going to say, she's busy right now. She already knows I've told her a lot. I'm going to tell her tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
That's the time that you should get up and walk over and tell her how you feel.
Because you're falling back into old habits?
Fear will often disguise itself as indifference.
Okay, yeah.
So if I had some fear because of a past dynamic that I had in my early life of sharing my feelings with people, and that showed up as a fear, I might look at my wife and say, well, that doesn't make any sense because that's my wife. Why would I be scared?
Mm-hmm.
But if that fear disguises itself as indifference, it's very easy to say, I don't feel like it right now. She's busy. I can tell her tomorrow.
Right.
That gets through very easily.
Interesting. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, that indifference or it's almost like indifference or even procrastination.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yes. They're both quite similar. You're just like, I don't feel like doing it.
Yeah, and you just kind of justify it in your brain somehow, but actually that's a super slippery slope to get started on.
Well, and you really can't feel the anxiety that's underneath you when, eventually when, like with procrastination, you're going to get to the point where you're so like, oh my God, I need to get this done. You finally do it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's there the whole time. You're just not acknowledging it.
Yeah, it just doesn't bubble to the surface, but it's brewing inside you and probably having a lot of subconscious and physical effects that you might not even identify with.
Well, yeah, and when your body doesn't feel good, you start looking for what's wrong out here. So there's a lot more things that are going wrong.
Yeah.
Things are doing or saying are things that are going wrong.
Or the temperature is too hot. We need to increase the air conditioning so I can cool off. But actually, you're burning up inside no matter what.
Exactly, yeah.
Not that it's a joking matter. I just, it's a slight aside. So how has it helped or hurt your business with the absolute mobbing and of psychedelics and the discussion of psychedelics in the community? Like, it's very, I watch and listen to a lot of podcasts and people are talking about this stuff almost on a daily basis. People are discussing it. It's kind of out there in the open. I'm wondering if you see this as being helpful to you being able to help more people, or whether you think it's harmful because it's setting up wrong expectations when people do come to you.
Well, I think, the cat's out of the bag. It can't be put back in. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. That's done already.
Yeah, but that's been kind of, psychedelics and LSD and mushrooms. I mean, people have known that this have been mind altering, for centuries, I guess. But let's say, in the last 30 years or 40 years, people have been using it more regularly. But I mean, when it comes to using psychedelics as like a silver bullet to help us with something, I think that part of it might be new, or that part of it is maybe now in the last few years starting to go mainstream.
The last 4 or 5 years have really been. I mean, Michael Pollan's book was really one of the catalysts for that. because you had a mainstream author who wasn't an advocate or part of the psychedelic community anyway, who was very well known. He's one of my favorite authors and storytellers. Suddenly comes out with this book that's very readable for people who are beginners in psychedelics. So I would recommend that they read that. But it did bring in a lot of people. The psychedelic integration circles started to become filled with people who just had basic questions about psychedelics. Can it help me with this? How many times do I have to take it to do that? The hype has not helped with helping people temper their expectations.
Mm-hmm.
And it's created a lot of hope in people that this thing is going to be the thing that finally fixes them. And, in some cases, it actually might be that. But it's not every time, and it's not guaranteed. Not just taking the substance, and it's not easy sometimes, and it can be difficult. And you might have to relive things that were difficult for you, and you might have to do some uncomfortable work in the aftermath.
It sounds like it's a real journey, and you just can't control it, and you kind of have to give up that lack of control and just accept that you're going to go down this alleyway or this rabbit hole, and it could be butterflies and kittens, or it could be darkness and fear and anxiety and past trauma. You have no idea which kind of door is going to open.
No, that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
And
that's terrifying to me.
Well, I'll just say that one thing I often say is that there's no such thing, there's nothing in the psychedelic experience that is a lesson about that experience. Everything in the psychedelic experience is a lesson about life, including the fact that you're really not in control.
Yeah, that's sure.
As much as you think you are. And if you just let go and go with it, you'll be a lot happier and it'll be a lot easier for you. That's not easy because the illusion of control is ingrained in our nervous systems. It's something
now more than ever.
Every day, yeah. I mean, I was just recently listening, and again, Ellen Langer, her latest book, she says, one of the best things you could do is not worry about making the right decision. Just make the decision right. Meaning, once I made the decision, move on. Don't think about, should I have bought the other thing? Should I have taken the other job? So I moved to the other city? That's just a trap.
Mm-hmm.
Once you've made a decision, just start looking at the reasons why that works. Unless it doesn't for some reason, then do some revisionism.
I always used to say, and I don't know if this is relevant, but I'll say it anyways. There's not many people watching. I always used to say, like, if you come to a fork in the road, you're way better off making a decision quickly and wholeheartedly following that decision until proven wrong, and then having to backtrack and go the other way, versus, going one way, maybe going the other way, or just thinking about it and having it totally consume your brain. Because at least if you've decided to go on one path and wholeheartedly go that way, first of all, that's very healthy because you're not second guessing yourself, and there's no negativity in that movement or action. But then if you after a certain amount of time realize it's wrong, okay, well, now you've learned something.
Right.
Well, that's also good.
Right.
And then now maybe the other path will be right.
Yeah.
So, but a lot of people get completely paralyzed when it's decision-making time. And I'm like, it doesn't really matter. Just do one thing or the other, but don't sit, right? Because, sitting on a decision is terrible. Just pick a path and then, follow it until it's no longer the path. I don't know if that's too simple.
Perfect demonstration of the point that what Al Langer said. Just don't worry about making the right decision. Make the decision right. And then, like you said, if it's not the right one, you learned something. You have new information. Your trip down that other fork in the road is going to be more fruitful now because you've got new information with you. But what most people do is think about something, and they think that they're evaluating. Most of the time, they're not. They're just kind of going back and forth, and eventually what they do is essentially flip a coin. I mean, we don't keep taking in information in ways this way and ways that way. We just keep going back and forth. Mm-hmm. And finally we pick one where we could have done that earlier.
Or sharing that, or putting that anxiety onto other people as well, like sharing this anxiety that you have, and then I put it onto you and make you feel anxious about my fucking decisions, and then maybe even asking your advice about what I should do.
Yeah.
And that's the worst, because you don't know anything about me and how I function, or how, what happened to me 20 years ago when I made a similar decision and it didn't work. Like, I just find like people are looking to remove themselves sometimes from that responsibility also.
There's a study that said that most CEOs make the majority of decisions they make in less than 9 minutes.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
So they don't ask a lot of questions or look at a lot of data. They just do it.
Mm-hmm. A gut feeling, and then mobilize the troops to push forward on that new directive.
And if it's one where you know there's going to be some risks that you might have to back up on, then you take some time. You don't do it with every decision.
Yeah. I also feel like, and this is a big issue maybe today, I also feel like people are overthinking, right? I find like I was speaking with someone else recently who was all about kind of living in the moment, living in the now, right? And they were saying that, so many people are overthinking and second guessing themselves to the point where they're completely missing what's going on in front of them in this moment. Like you alluded to it earlier about people living in the past or living in the future, but forgetting about, existing right now. And if you just exist right now, you can reduce a lot of anxiety that you feel about the past or the future. And when you just live in the moment and you're experiencing the emotions that are in the room, right?
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, like, what part of the psychedelic experience could help people focus and be more mindful in the moment? Because I feel like the way a lot of psychedelic experiences have been explained to me in the past would be, oh, something happened to me, or I need to change something that I do that I don't like. But in your experience, has it also helped people find that kind of now emotion or that mindfulness of really like existing in the moment, like looking at that coffee cup and seeing that beautiful intricate art on it that you just didn't even look at for 20 years? Do you find that people start to completely look at the world in a much more mindful now kind of way?
Well, they have to. This is where some work comes in. Your brain doesn't want you to be here now.
I feel like our brain is just sabotaging us.
Oh yeah, your brain's just always, the strange thing is when something goes from, like, something bothers me, when it no longer bothers me, when it's not a problem anymore, all of the change that went into that occurred at the unconscious level. So
That's interesting.
certain muscle groups have relaxed, certain points of view that weren't previously considered were, resulting in a reframe. Maybe your heart rate and blood pressure adjusted to appropriate levels, and all that just bubbles up to us as that thing just happened. Don't really care anymore. But that means that your unconscious has a roadmap to making changes that are beneficial to you so that things don't bother you. So why doesn't it just do that? Because your brain is running automatic programs that interfere with that process. The good news about that is you're not your brain.
Right.
You're not even your mind, but I think you're much more your mind than you are your brain. Your brain is just an organ that thinks a lot. It's like a computer. It works on what's been put into it, and it automates things, and it's trying to help you, but it doesn't know what to do. It's working on what it's had before. So a lot of what we do is updating the brain so that it understands it's not being helpful. There are ways of doing that. But your brain's trying to be helpful, but really, for all the thinking it does, it's not very smart sometimes. It can be kind of dumb. It's just repeating itself over and over.
So we have to break that cycle of repetition and train like new habits.
Well, mindfulness, we talked about Ellen Langer's version of mindfulness. Take some time to notice. She says mindfulness is just the process of noticing things. And I'll give you another example.
Well, noticing things puts you in the moment, right?
Exactly.
So right away, you're not thinking about, oh, that thing I fucked up on last week or that thing next week that I'm super anxious about.
Right.
So it's like, oh, look at this coffee cup.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, the past and the future are gone for those brief moments. Like it's almost like you're giving yourself a break.
Yeah, you absolutely are. And it feels much better being. I've had the experience during a psychedelic experience of seeing that window narrow of how far into the future and how far into the past I'm seeing. Like now it's just like sliver. And then when that disappears for a very brief time, you realize I'm in eternity right now. This is eternity. There's no such thing as the present or future. I mean, you can't point to them and you can't put them in your hand. They really don't exist. That's a cliche now, but they really are just things that we've made up. Things are going to happen, but there's no such thing as the future. It's not a thing. The past, you're just referring to things that happened before. And if you're really just here, then that's what you see when you see in certain yogis or spiritual teachers sometimes. Those guys are just here, and they're nowhere else that time. How do you replicate that? That's one of those things like, oh, I had that experience, psychedelic, what do I do now? Now I just try to be here as much as possible. So that's a lot of the work that I do with people. If you are here, then there's not as much that bothers you because you're not thinking about what's going to happen. You know, being smart's great, but if you're smart, you can come up with situations that you won't be able to handle if you keep thinking about things far enough in the future.
Yeah.
And if you keep dwelling on the past, you're going to keep strengthening those neural pathways. And sometimes you need to ask yourself, what happens when you're not thinking about the problem? Does it get worse?
No, because you're not snowballing it. It might even go away, you know, because you're focusing on other things.
Well, it actually might because, well, let's put it this way. Let's talk about conscious and unconscious mind. So your conscious mind is basically what is in your awareness right now. And it's been determined since the 1950s that it's 7 plus or minus 2 chunks of information. I can be aware that I'm having a conversation with Ryan, that my car's parked out there, what I had for lunch before, what I'm going to do later. When I get to 9 chunks of information, then I'm teetering on the edge. Now, if I ask you what your phone number is, you don't see where it was. You don't see it coming to the surface and all of it. It's just there. And when that happens, something else got pushed into your unconscious. Your unconscious, just everything else that's not in your conscious awareness. You can think of your conscious mind as a very little flashlight in a big dark room because every memory, dream, experience you've ever had in your life is in your unconscious mind. It's there.
Mm-hmm.
Your unconscious mind is not hampered by conscious awareness. So conscious mind does serial processing. That means it can do one thing at a time. We can't even multitask. That's an illusion. When you say multitasking, what you mean is you're really...
Or you're just doing 2 things terribly.
Try drawing 2 things at once. You got to alter your brain to be able to do that. We really don't multitask. We can go back and forth really quickly.
Right.
Your unconscious mind can. It can process hundreds of things at one time. It's extremely powerful. So if you've ever had that thing happen where somebody's name is on the tip of your tongue, you just can't remember, like, what is that guy's name? Oh, I almost had it. And then you eventually say, forget it. Just going to get some work done.
And then 10 minutes later, it bubbles up out of nowhere.
Voice says, Bob.
Yeah.
And then you say, I knew if I kept thinking about it, I'd remember it.
Mm.
You forgot about it. But your unconscious mind will always pay attention to what is immediately important to you. So when you said forget about it and pushed it into your unconscious mind, it said, oh, what's in that guy's name? I'm going to keep thinking about it. Bob, let's give it to him, Bob.
Mm.
So if you look at this, paying attention to a problem strengthens the neural network that problem's associated with. The problem doesn't get better when you're thinking. It just makes you feel worse. And really, if you give something to your unconscious mind, it's much better at processing things. Sometimes when we solve a problem or have an idea, that's been brewing back here for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is the conscious mind takes credit for it.
It just comes to the surface.
I just had this great idea. I knew if I kept thinking about that problem, I'd come up with an idea to help it.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example of this. There are operations where they have severed the corpus callosum. That is the connection between the left and right half of the brain. Right brain is all about creativity and your senses and everything. Left brain communication. Now, when they split this, showing things to your right side will cause your right side to react in a certain way. Showing things to your left side in a certain way. So they say, I'm going to give you some instructions and you have to follow them. They just show the right side something that says walk. The person gets up and starts walking. If you say, what are you doing? Now you're engaging the left side, which is responsible for communication. Left side has no idea why you're getting up. It didn't see the word walk. But when you say, what are you doing? The left side goes, I'm just going to get a drink of water. It totally makes something up.
Like an excuse.
Like an excuse. It's called retroactive storytelling. If you show the left side pictures like, here's a chicken claw, and the right side pictures like a snowman, then you ask the person, can you point to some things that have to do with what you just saw? The left hand points to a chicken, the right hand points to a snow shovel. If you say, why are you pointing to a snow shovel? What's that got to do with chickens? The left side, which is responsible for communication, says, if you have chickens, you have to shovel out the chicken pen.
Mm-hmm.
So our conscious mind just makes up stories. And when something's been solved by our unconscious mind, we're convinced that it happened with our conscious mind.
And we create a narrative around it to fit our needs.
Yeah, we'll just make up a story. But
that's wild.
It's just like, I knew I'd remember that guy's name if I kept thinking about it.
Mm.
But that creates this impression that if we just think about things long enough, we're going to solve it. That's true if I'm going to, invent a better pair of headphones. I can spend a lot of time thinking about different things, mechanical engineering and electronics and all that. But if it's a psychological problem, like a problem I have with a person, there's only a certain amount of thinking that's going to help. And after that, I'm just banging my head against a wall.
Do you have, what percentage of people would you say come to you looking for help that have tried, traditional therapy and pharmaceuticals and have had it not work, or just had not the desired kind of response, and then they come to you as not like a last gasp effort, but as an alternative, definitely to the more traditional paths out there?
Well, that would be about 75, 80% of the people who come to me, whether it has to do with psychedelics or not. Some people just come from coaching and they're not working with psychedelics or don't plan to. But that's true of most of the people that I work with.
It's funny that I've always kind of had a skepticism, I suppose, about maybe some traditional therapeutic practices, and definitely skeptical of some elements of the pharmaceutical industry for sure. And I have kind of, through the ups and downs of my life and my career, I have found, little like hacks about how to kind of overcome certain fears or depression or any of these kinds of things that I happen to be feeling. Like a lot of it's maybe spending more time in nature, disconnecting from society, disconnecting from social media. Like these kinds of little things, help kind of propel me into a much better headspace. And I'm always kind of concerned when people just think that like taking a fistful of pills is going to solve their problems. And I find that kind of terrifying, but it seems like the people who are led into your world and into your space have kind of rejected that. And I guess that's what alternative medicine is, right? It's an alternative. But I'm wondering if people, just gravitate towards you without having gone through all of those traditional therapeutic practices and just know that that's already not for them.
Yeah, I would say that's probably more common for people who are planning on working with psychedelics or working with psychedelics. Maybe there's a percentage of those people that are like that. Most of the people who have been on a path for a while or are coming from coaching have been to multiple therapists, used medication, other coaches, have tried other alternative methods, a long history of working with people and substances and different methods of addressing whatever they think is wrong.
And in those 70 or 80% of the clients that come to you that have gone through the traditional therapeutic or pharmaceutical kind of space, what are some of the main reasons why those traditional practices didn't work for them? In that reason of why they came to you?
Well, there are good and bad coaches and therapists.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I have people who come to me to therapists. So, like I said, my wife's a therapist. I think she's one of the best. She's the best therapist I know of, and she actually helps people. A lot of people come from therapists. When I hear what they've been doing, I don't think it's been very helpful. And I've been to therapists who weren't very helpful, but I was sort of one step ahead with. And if you go past that, if you get to people who are not as good as they could be at their job, sometimes they're using a lot of conscious processing to try to defeat unconscious processes like we talked about. Milton Erickson was an MD and hypnotherapist who was a genius at working with people. And he said, change will lead to insight far more often than insight will lead to change.
Okay, that's interesting, yeah.
It's very difficult to come at a problem this way sometimes and get to it. Once someone has actually shifted internally and something no longer bothers them, now we've broken that boundary condition around the neural network we were talking about. And you'll see people saying things like, oh, now I get it. That wasn't about me. I can see what that person's intention when they were actually trying to help, or that wasn't as bad as I thought it was. There's a lot of information in the state that you're in once you've made a change. But a lot of times people try to give people that information in order to get them to change state. But when you have this boundary condition around a neural network, it doesn't want to hear those things. And sometimes those things just bounce off of people. So therapy can be a long haul sometimes on something that's an unconscious process.
Interesting. And how important do you think it is, like, because obviously I've lived abroad for many, many years, but when you come to California, it feels like a whole different universe. People here are very creative. People here are in many ways, I think, open to trying new things or trying everything. I mean, there's a reason why California has the feeling that it does and has that kind of feeling of freedom that it has. And how important is is for your work to be here in Los Angeles and to be here in California, where in my mind, at least, people seem to be more open to trying new paths and new avenues?
Well, most of my work is done online over Zoom.
Okay.
So,
Oh, that's interesting. Actually, I forgot. I didn't even ask that. Like, I mean, I would expect it to be face to face, actually, because
the majority of my work's done online.
wow,
Yeah.
wow, that's interesting. Because when I was setting this up, I was thinking like, should I do it face to face or should I do it online? If I was like, well, if I do it online, I can do more and I can have more guests and probably more higher profile guests because they don't want to travel to see me. But then I started feeling like the connection wouldn't be the same. And I really relish that idea of just sitting across from someone with no screen in between us and actually getting to know someone. And I wanted to make that the core of this experience. And I mean, it's great that you can have an influence or have have influence in helping people via Zoom. But I mean, is it like 50-50 Zoom versus, or even more?
Probably 70% people not in this area.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's huge.
90% Zoom.
Oh.
Probably most of the people I work with are not in Los Angeles. I might not be able to work with them. And I mean, I work with people internationally too.
Oh, wow. But I mean, like, would you meet them at least once face to face before you started the Zoom? Or
Some people I've never met face to face.
wow, that's amazing. And they can still, find that trust in you and find that connection with you to go through like an alternative therapeutic experience, I guess.
I have a very trusting air.
I'm loving it. Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I get that. I wouldn't say that you're not untrusting, but I'm just saying like, sometimes, yeah, I just feel like, that personal touch. Obviously, when you're working in the communities in Santa Monica, and you were in that group and in that room together sharing, and you're shoulder to shoulder with people, that's a real personal connection because people can see, and feel your body language and everything like that about how these stories that you're telling are affecting you.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff maybe that doesn't come through a screen. There's a lot of communication that might not come through a 2D screen, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. But that's great that you've been able to help people who aren't necessarily in the LA County.
Yeah, especially during COVID.
Yeah, I mean, because you probably saw a decent spike of people looking for.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It's been hard, as I said, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and the amount of like phone therapy or Zoom therapy companies that have set up in the last like 2 or 3 years to help people deal with isolationism, anxiety, and all this kind of stuff has really all come out of the pandemic. It's like a whole new healthcare sector has come out of like remote therapeutic sessions. Telehealth. Yeah, exactly. I mean, how do you feel about that? Is that helping what you do or hurting?
I don't know, because I see myself kind of separate from them. So I might not be to most people, but that's how I view it.
Yeah, no, I mean, it definitely is. I think, but because you're dealing in you're obviously dealing in a really different way. Like you are one singular person, helping another singular person work through an issue that they want to work through, and you're coaching them through it. Maybe you're introducing, preparing them for an experience, a psychedelic experience, and then helping them coach afterwards instead of just maybe providing regular therapeutic conversation, which is what a lot of these services are doing. So, and the services also seem a little bit like nameless or faceless, right? Like you don't really even know who you're dealing with or what experiences they've had in their past that would qualify them to even understand what you're going through. So I would see a lot of barriers with that versus like someone like yourself who is building, their own reputation based on their own experiences.
Yeah, when I see something that says, call us and we've got a good therapist for you, it's kind of like I need to know the person. You can't just like, here's your therapist.
Yeah. So, I mean, would you have any advice for anyone today who wants to, go through a therapeutic experience or a psychedelic experience? Would you have any advice for someone who like today would listen to this podcast and want to go through a psychedelic experience as a way of dealing with something in their life that they want to change or work through?
Well, they should ask a lot of questions, do a lot of research, determine whether or not psychedelics are right for them. If they wanted to dip their toe in the water and see if that was something that worked for them, there's always the options of there are cannabis sessions people can have now that mirror psychedelic sessions, and cannabis can be quite psychedelic, but obviously there's a lot more short acting, a little bit safer. And there are things like breath work, which can be quite psychedelic. So if they want to dip their toe in the water, they can do that. They should read a lot. They should ask a lot of questions. If they're going to be working with a person,
Such as
a leader, well, I mean, like a psychedelic facilitator, someone's going to administer substance, or someone who's conducting a ceremony, they should be very, very comfortable with that person. I mean, they should not have any discomfort because psychedelics are also amplifiers. So one of the standard questions in some of the clinical trials, they'll tell people, I'd like you to think of probably your least favorite psychological state that you've been in the last 3 months and ask yourself if it would be okay to amplify that 5 to 7 times. If the answer is no, you probably don't want to do this.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Because that can happen.
So if you were depressed 4 weeks ago, something happened in your life and it brought you really into a dark space, but you've been able to bounce out of it, you went deep and then you came back, that could be re-amplified through a psychedelic session.
Yeah. So they are non-specific amplifiers of consciousness, as Stan Grof said. So just remember that. I mean, you might be very uncomfortable. If you're going to work with someone, make sure that you're very comfortable with them, that they've answered all of your questions, that they're not pushing you. Make sure you have some support afterwards, whether that's through a coach, therapist, whatever it is, but just make sure someone's available to support you. Know what you're taking and how much it is, and do a lot of research on that substance. If you're taking any medications or you have any kind of psychological diagnoses, make sure that those things aren't contraindicated.
Okay. And again, completely naive to this whole system, this whole process. Taking psychedelic drugs is illegal.
Yeah.
In California, in the United States. But obviously people are doing it, and people are doing it here, for therapeutic purposes. So for you as a psychedelic integration, coach, expert, transforming people through that, do people come to you asking you to make suggestions of who they should see to have a psychedelic experience? Because that would be illegal.
Yeah, I can't help them with that. I can't help them procure substances, tell them where to get it, who to ask for. I usually tell them if they're looking for something, there's a community around them somewhere. There are a lot of psychedelic societies and clubs and gatherings, and if they want more information, that's the place to go.
Right. Yeah, because if you started recommending people, that would put you in a difficult place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And what are those communities like here in Los?
By the way, I want to back up on one thing when you're talking about legality.
Yeah.
The other way of dipping your toe in is also ketamine, which is the only federally legal psychedelic substance. Ketamine clinics are legal.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. And what would be the difference between like ketamine and like ayahuasca or mushrooms?
So ketamine was a tranquilizer. It was an animal tranquilizer primarily.
That's right. That's where I've heard that before. Yes.
Right. So ketamine can just sort of disconnect you from what's going on, it's very good for depression sometimes because it just gives the person's nervous system a rest from something that they're in quite often. Gives them a place to go to say, look, you can be in this place. But a lot of ketamine clinics just give you the infusion and then say, you can go now. I highly recommend that people get some support around ketamine experience, especially if they're depressed.
The before and the after.
Before, especially after.
Yeah.
But ketamine is the only thing legal federally. There are a lot of places where psychedelics have been decriminalized, just meaning that they're at the bottom of the list for any district attorney for things they might prosecute for. But yeah,
finally,
for the most part, illegal. Yeah.
Okay. And then they're kind of treated the same state by state, I guess. Yeah. I guess California would be probably the most relaxed, maybe.
Portland actually, I don't want to say illegal in every state. Portland has legalized psilocybin use by licensed facilitators who don't have to be therapists. But like you have to go through a state training program and go to a specific facility, and it's still quite expensive. You're still looking at thousands of dollars.
Mm-hmm. But that's pretty interesting that Oregon is that kind of advanced in where they're headed with all of this, because they seem like they realize that there's some benefit to it, so they're just trying to, to make it more accessible and to have some kind of, standard.
Yeah, and they've actually legalized it. You can use it for spiritual purposes. It's not just medicalized, not just a medical model.
Right. But I mean, that's how psychedelics really began, right? Is for spiritual purposes, to kind of elevate our bodies into some other space where we can connect with things. And I guess
this medical model is a recent thing.
it is, right.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of things that we did when we were quote unquote like cavemen, sorry for the being very simple, but I think a lot of the alternative medications or the alternative therapeutic processes that we're looking for and hunting for now are actually things that we probably did 10, 15,000 years ago, on a daily basis, that actually our body has now realized, like, holy shit, I need this in my life.
Yeah.
Like, what am I doing to myself? I need to walk barefoot in the grass. I need to feel the soil between my toes. I need to sleep under the stars and sleep with the rhythm of the earth, go to bed at 6 p.m., wake up at 6 a.m. And I feel like there's so much in us that's subconsciously begging for those rituals or those habits that we had 10, 15,000 years ago, that we now have to come up with mind-altering ways of bringing us back to that space somehow, through a psychedelic experience. Like, I've really realized that just in spending massive amounts of time out in remote nature. Like, for example, in 2019, I think I spent probably like 150 days in 1 year sleeping in a tent on the side of a mountain, like various mountains and deserts all around the world. Like, and I've never felt calmer. I've never been healthier. I've never slept better. Zero anxiety, zero depression. I was getting great physical exertion every day, sleeping with the rhythm of the earth. Connecting very powerfully with the small group of people around me who were also going through a very physically demanding, difficult experience, but having that kind of solidarity and that connection and all of these things. And I was just like, oh my God, like, we're living the way we used to before society and technology got in the way of everything, or propelled us into wherever we are now, if you are super happy with the world we have. But I really feel like we're itching to get back to something we had then, and I feel like psychedelics is part of that.
Well, there's almost no culture that doesn't have some sort of medicine or substance that alters people's consciousness throughout history. But you brought up a very important point, and that is, I work with people, before and after, but in the middle part, there are a lot of places where people consume psychedelics in group settings, in a ceremonial setting.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something very powerful about learning the power of ceremony and the power of ritual. And that's something that we also do. When you're forming habits, those are also rituals. Making your bed every day can be a ritual. Rituals are things you do every day, mindfully, being present in the thing that you're doing at a particular time in a particular way. Those are also two very important aspects of life, I think. And it's a way of instilling those things within this concrete jungle.
Yes, and we do live in a concrete jungle. If someone wanted to have a psychedelic experience, would you feel comfortable suggesting to them, you seem like maybe you're someone who should have this experience alone with a practitioner or in a group setting? Like, what would be the difference between those experiences? I mean, in your personal experience, when you've gone through these sessions, these psychedelic experience sessions, have you been in a group of people? I mean, I would find if I had some deep, dark stuff to go through and I was going to do ayahuasca or mushrooms or something like that, I don't know how I would feel being surrounded by other people also going through. Maybe I'd feel self-conscious about really letting myself go, right? I'd be worried about, maybe I'll start crying. I don't want people around me to see me crying, or maybe, some other traumatic event, I'll start to say things maybe I don't want other people to hear, but maybe I don't also want to see other people going through what they might be going through. Like, what's the difference, do you think, between maybe going through something as an individual versus experiencing it as a group?
Yeah, if you're talking about significant trauma, you're going to talk about someone who's very skilled as a facilitator, most likely a therapist.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a lot of screening that goes on to make sure it's an appropriate treatment. But, the consideration that I don't want people to see me opening up, that's definitely one to consider. But the other one is that, once again, these things are amplifiers. So one thing I usually say about doing psychedelics with other people is that the good thing about doing psychedelics with other people is you'll get to work on your triggers around other people. Bad thing about doing psychedelics with other people is that you're going to be working on your triggers around other people.
Yeah.
And if there's someone that you don't particularly like, it's probably not a good idea to do that substance with them, because you're probably not going to like them when you're done, because it's going to amplify something. And that something may have nothing to do with that person.
Yeah.
In fact, it's a very good lesson to know that the thing that repels you about someone most of the time has very little to do with them,
Right.
to do with you or your past.
But that'll be amplified in the experience.
In the experience, yeah. It's
And
not
that'll make
common for someone to come and say, there was some person in a ceremony they were at that were just completely, totally, oh, that guy was so annoying, and go on and on about it. And ask them, how do the other people feel? I'm like, well, they didn't really care. They didn't feel the same way I did. It's not objective.
No, not at all. It doesn't seem to be, which is also kind of, I mean, it's expected, but it's also kind of terrifying.
Well, one of the first times that I was facilitating an integration circle, I remember there was a person who was talking a lot. And I remember having a thought that he was kind of annoying. And I looked around and I realized that people were smiling and talking to him and laughing. I thought, no, he's not annoying. I'm annoyed by it. There's a big difference between those two things. So this is what needs work, not the.
And what was that? What was that thing inside you that was annoyed by him? Were you able to identify that, or was it?
Well, I'll just tell you that if you're annoyed by somebody, there's usually three possibilities. They could be doing something that you do that your unconscious mind's kind of waving a flag saying, hey, you do this thing. I don't know if you realize it, but it's something you do.
Mm-hmm.
It could be something that you used to do that you have some guilt or shame around, like, oh my God, I used to be like that person. Can't believe that. It could be that person reminds you of a person, place, time, or situation in which you didn't feel safe.
Okay, interesting.
Any of those can be possibilities. Now, there are people who may act inappropriate in a certain way, and don't do group settings well. That's a given. But the first place to look is always here.
When you're feeling kind of frustration with someone else, yeah.
People are mirrors.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think that's the truth. And I think also too, like, it's funny because, the energy that you give out is what you attract, right? So if you're giving out kind of shittiness, you're going to get back shittiness. I mean, that's not a medical description of that, but that's what I mean, right? Just, the more crap you put out into the world, the more crap you get back.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I get what you give.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, what's next for you in 2024? Like, are you, would you ever write a book on your experiences? Are you, would you ever speak to larger groups about this, or are you really focused on like the individual connection that you have with your clients or people that you work with?
I've been asked by some groups and clubs and places to speak to people who are interested in learning about psychedelics. I'm doing that more. I'm developing a couple of talks. I've done talks in the past to, groups in Los Angeles and online. I'm developing one now on hacking integration. It's got a lot of things from neuroscience, quantum physics, different spiritual and personal growth disciplines and philosophies to put together to sort of simplify the process of integration.
Interesting. Because I feel like, there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's also like a lot of fear, like around people who want to research some of these things or learn more about them, because there's, like everything on the internet, there's too much of everything on the internet. So
there's too much information.
Yeah. And narrowing things down is a real issue. Do you have, are you able to suggest a few places where people might be able to go to learn a little bit more before they would make a decision to contact someone like you?
Boy, I don't know of a clearinghouse. You just have to be discerning when you're on, if you're listening to people, or especially people online, take everything you hear with a grain of salt and double check it.
Yeah.
People have a lot of opinions that they like to state as facts.
Yes, that's the truth. And would you recommend one book that someone should probably read if they're about to take this journey into this alternative space?
If they're just starting off, I think that How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan's a very good book.
Yeah.
To familiarize people with sort of the history of psychedelics in modern America and some of the basic substances.
Interesting. And I mean, would you, there's a lot of people that would be like, oh, let's go to Peru and find a shaman and do ayahuasca, or, like, is that an experience you might suggest to a client that might be actually useful for them, or would you even suggest like doing it here in LA, with a practitioner that you have to find on your own? But I feel like the setting is really important, and if you're using your mental health and a psychedelic experience as a reason for tourism, maybe it's not maybe the best idea. I don't know. I'm just kind of speaking out loud, trying to figure out, where this thread might be of having the most effectiveness to help you on your journey. Like where might that be like a safest place to have that psychedelic experience?
Well, I don't like to recommend substances, but I will say that psilocybin, magic mushrooms, are one of the physiologically safest substances you can take. There are more 911 calls every year for cannabis and aspirin than there are for psilocybin. It does alter your mind, so I recommend at least having a sitter with you the first time you do it. But, before you go off to Peru and spend 9 days there and take ayahuasca 5 nights in a row, probably dip your toe in the water with ketamine, cannabis, breath work, something like that, or a local ceremony. You can find ceremonies, there are probably hundreds of them in California alone, every weekend, like 2 to 3 night ceremonies of ayahuasca and mushrooms and different things. But you should always trust the people that you're working with. But before you go up, a lot of people do that. They pick up and go to Peru and they go to do ayahuasca. And I've heard some amazing stories of the transformation people have gone through. But you should consider that. It's not the only option.
No.
But setting does make a difference. And there is a feel to, there is a sort of an authenticity and a feel to that authentic setting, even if it's an authentic setting here in the States, of the Icaros, which is the music that they say that ayahuasca is written for it, and the medicine songs and sort of the traditions that go along with an ayahuasca ceremony, rather than just, chugging it out of a bottle with some friends.
Yeah. I think like if I was going to have a psychedelic experience, I've never had a psychedelic experience before, and which is why I'm asking all these questions as well. Like, I think to have it in nature with someone, or a sitter or someone to kind of take care of me to make sure it all goes right, to have that experience like in nature. I know Joshua Tree National Park is quite a famous place to go out and do that, because I think there's a part of us deep inside in our subconscious or in our soul or whatever that wants to have a stronger connection with our natural world.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe that kind of psychedelic experience would be enhanced in some way, or add even greater clarity if we're not sitting in a room with 4 walls while we go through that.
Well, in the clinical trials, once again, they're usually in headphones with some non-invasive music and eye shades, but they're all different experiences, and experience in nature is great. And for someone like you who's so drawn to it, that puts you in a state that gives you an advantage too.
Yeah.
Set and setting is a very important thing, a very important consideration. Set is your mindset, the state that you're in, and setting is your physical setting. So, you love that physical setting and it puts you in a great mindset. So those are 2 pluses for you.
I mean, a couple of years ago, I walked across a desert in China for like 14 days. We did like 120 miles. And by the end of that, I was seeing things in completely...
I was going to say, that's very psychedelic on its own.
Complete mind melt, and incredibly physical. But it did kind of elevate you into like a state of meditation, because I feel like you're waking up kind of every day and you're walking 10 to 12 hours and there's really nothing to see because everything looks the same, and there's nothing really to talk to because there's nothing new to talk about, and you just kind of end up in your own headspace for hours and hours on end.
In a trance.
Yeah. And I used to say this a lot, like, you see it with a lot of people who do long distance running, right? It becomes like a trance or meditation where they're able to like unlock a part of their brain that feels pain or feels anything, and they just kind of go, and they don't really have deep thoughts, or maybe they are having such deep thoughts they don't even remember them later. But it becomes a trance, something out of body, out of mind. And I feel like sometimes, when we were doing these big walks or climbs, even though like we were safe and managing, you do kind of, you let your mind go to a totally different place, and that can be absolutely beautiful. It actually became addictive at one stage. I started to feel like depressed when I would be coming back into the real world, and then I would feel a heightened level again when I would go back out. We were doing like So we were doing these massive expeditions all around the world, and we were doing 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, and we did them for like 6 or 7 years. So, you know, we were constantly having this, I was constantly aware of these psychological effects and how I was feeling when I was coming back and having to deal with real life and society versus being able to go out and film and be in all these kind of really special places where I felt much more myself, I suppose.
Must be very cool to have the ability to unhook for a couple of weeks completely.
It was. And it was great that I was able to craft employment out of it, I suppose, you know, and make it kind of a living, because I think it helped me more than I could have ever imagined. And I feel like, you know, when I do talks and when I connect with people, you know, they get that sense of energy and they get that sense of feeling like, well, this is someone who's maybe seen some crazy shit and been, you know, to far-flung places in the world. And it changes the confidence in the way you speak to people, and it changes the respect you have, I think, for every walk of life, because you've seen so much craziness. It's not just, oh, you know, that person doesn't live in Beverly Hills, I can't talk to them. Well, I walked through Papua New Guinea with 20 Papua New Guineans, you know, and we all became best friends at the end of it, and it was beautiful. So, you know, you just get much more respect for the many paths that people walk in this life on this planet.
Very cool.
Yeah. Is there anything you're working on that you want to talk about or promote, or anything that you want to plug that you've got coming up in the next couple months?
Well, in addition to this work I do, my wife and I work together. We have a series of Tantra-informed relationship courses called The Science of Creating Your Soulmate. You can find me at psychedelicintegrationspecialist.com. I'm Greg Lawrence on Facebook. Always happy to connect with people. I've got talks going to be coming up, integration circles every month. So
okay,
always something happening.
Brilliant. And I'll make sure I put your website on and tag you and everything like that, and make sure this gets out into the world. Well, I can't thank you enough for your time today. I just bombarded you with questions, and I'm really happy.
I love it. It's good talking to you.
Excellent. So now we can go up here. You can see we can go wide, and we shake it out. Wonderful to meet you.
You too.
Thanks for coming by.
Thanks, Ryan.